Hello and welcome to Unleashed, the podcast about the people, the projects, and the culture of Big Red Dog. Every episode, we sit down with a team member to discuss what they're doing on a daily basis to chase their passions, help our clients become successful, and make the engineering business cool. I'm Sean Terrio-Smith, your co-host, along with Kelly Dakin. Kelly, how you doing today?
Good, Sean. What's going on, man?
Not much. I'm excited to get this show on the road. We're going to our construction side of things, talk to our QA/QC team. I'm excited to start. Hi, and welcome back to the show. As we mentioned in the intro, we're going to be talking to our construction services team. This team helps us manage our projects as they enter into construction phase services after it's designed and developed and permitted, and the contractor is given the issue to proceed, the issue for construction set, and the notice to proceed to start building out there. Our team over in the Austin office handles it quite a bit, and the gentleman that heads it up for us is named Joel Blok. Joel, welcome to the show.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, so I say team. I think you might be actually a one-man show over there at the moment.
Yeah, I have one EIT working for me as well, or working with me as well. And it's been great. It's kind of morphed over the last year or so. Kelly actually used to hold this position, and I succeeded Kelly. And it's been good. It's been a kind of morphing into a slightly larger team with a few more responsibilities, trying to take on the world and the whirlwind that is construction in Austin.
I thought you said taking over the world, man.
Well, that's the next step,
Yes.
but right now we're just focusing on construction.
Cool, awesome, yeah. So there's obviously a lot of things that need to be done in the city of Austin, since it's a fairly regulated city. There's a lot of touch points that the engineering company and consultant needs to be involved with as a project gets built. It's not as involved perhaps in other jurisdictions. And I know in the city of Austin, it's a pretty heavy process. So you're really heavily involved. As soon as that thing's permitted, we give a positive handover to y'all, and you guys take over the reins and start. Maybe do some light QA/QC stuff in the beginning, but, immediately start rolling into construction meetings and pre-con meetings and whatnot and going forward. So can you go over the general process after you get a designed and permitted set from the civil or structural team or whomever it might be? What do you start with generally?
Sure. So actually, to roll it back even a little further, as we're building the team out a little bit, it's given us a little more opportunity to get involved early in the process, even before permit. With the complexity that is even just getting a project set up for inspections and really for dirt to start moving on a site, it helps a lot to have folks involved as early as possible. So we're starting to see clients involve contractors early on, and we try to join as the construction phase team. We try to join the conversation early as well to talk about strategies for basically as soon as that permit comes through the door, how we can hit the ground running. With really getting things moving on the project setup side with the city of Austin. There's a fairly involved, maybe complex process involved with getting the project rolling to a point where you can actually roll machines on site and start moving dirt. And so we try to jump in with some kind of high level just constructability review. Projects can be, really well designed and really well reviewed. And every now and then there are things that it takes a little bit of a practiced eye where, what's drawn on plans is perfectly up to code and it'll work just fine. But from a constructability standpoint, there might be a slightly more advantageous or budget or timeline conscious way to execute that. And so we try to jump in and through our experience with contractors and having seen this done a few times, we try to inform on that. So that's kind of the first step. And then as the permit, once the permit gets delivered, if you will, we generally sit down with the design teams and have a fairly formal kickoff meeting. We don't call it a handoff meeting because our design teams do stay involved all the way through the project. We just join the project to kind of help facilitate construction. At that handoff meeting or kickoff meeting, if you will, we talk through some of the particular challenges, some of the atypical conditions on the site, some of the timeline sensitive items that we should be keen on and making sure the contractor is aware of, what needs to happen and what might need to be done a little differently. And so once we have that internal meeting, then we kind of start involvement immediately on the team meetings with potentially the owner, the architect, the contractor. We call those OAC meetings. But at the same time, we start getting the process rolling. And really the first step of the process is getting your inspections set up. So here in the city of Austin, you initially have an environmental inspector that needs to come out and make a pre-construction meeting and site visit with the team to kind of look at the erosion and sedimentation controls, make sure that the site is basically ready to start moving dirt on it. And so we participate in that meeting. And then also there's a second inspector on the civil side called the Public Works or right-of-way inspector who looks at all of the infrastructure, whether that's concrete or water and wastewater or drainage in the public right-of-way or in easements. And none of that work can start until you have that inspector assigned. And there's a little bit more sophisticated process with that in terms of setting up the fees that you pay for inspection. You pay estimated inspection fees at the beginning of the project, and until those fees are paid, you can't have the pre-con meeting. Until you have the pre-con meeting, you can't start any of that work in the right-of-way. And so there's a little bit of lead time involved with that, and there's a lot of back and forth coordination with the contractor, with the owner, and with the inspectors. But as soon as we kind of get those two site meetings kicked off and crossed off the list, then it's full speed ahead on construction, and then it kind of settles into what approximates a routine, I guess, with meeting with continuing meetings with the project team, continuing to respond to questions that might arise from the field, being fairly nimble when field conditions arise that require a little bit of alteration of the plans. And we kind of continue that process throughout, again, looping in the design team. So our design teams are never separated from the process or from the project. But having an extra, face in the field helps to kind of maintain a high level of service that we're so proud of here at Big Red Dog. And then moving through the process, just to kind of wrap it up, when the project is finished, there are a series of final closeout documents and a series of final closeout site inspections with the same two inspectors that we initially set the project up. And we go through a closeout with them, and we make sure that the project is ready to be turned back over. Certain elements of the project get turned back over to the public domain, obviously, and also getting ready to ensure that the project is sufficiently designed and executed for occupancy. And that's when the project kind of wraps up, and then we've kind of been involved through the whole process.
Wow, yeah, I mean that's quite a bit of process. I mean, for many design consultants, in this industry, we have perhaps not as much of a involved party to that contract, or sorry, the contracting and construction period, especially in the city of Houston. It's perhaps not as involved just by requirement regulation, but we still remain pretty involved regardless. But to have that opportunity to see every step of the way how the design is being implemented, to have that wealth of experience behind you to know whether or not it may be perhaps working on paper, but it's not going to work in the ground once it gets there. I believe Mark Remmert, our MEP director, spoke about that in a previous episode. He touched on his construction and contracting background, really to build that experience, that level of skill needed to make a structural and MEP interaction work, and tying that into the site and everything. And the same thing with the civil side of things. You just have this level of experience necessary to know that perhaps it looks good and it's permittable, but it's not necessarily constructible. So that's great that we're able to have these dedicated teams that tie into the design team and carry that process forward. That we're not dropping any balls, making sure that everything's lining up correctly. So once you got into engineering originally, what kind of drew you to the construction side of things? Was it something you came out of school knowing you wanted to get into the construction auditing and review period, or did you want to start design in the beginning?
No, actually, I did start design in the beginning. So I've taken a relatively circuitous route, I guess, to Big Red Dog. I did my undergrad at a small liberal arts school in Michigan. Had an emphasis in civil engineering there. I decided through a mentor there that I wanted to go to grad school for structural engineering. Got my master's at the University of Texas here in Austin. Got stuck here in Austin and ended up, working for 5 years, almost 5 years as a structural design engineer. Worked with some great people on some great projects. Really scratched the design itch for quite a while, and had a great time and learned an awful lot. But I realized as I got to work on some really great projects here in both the design and construction phase here in Austin, getting to, see projects get erected in the city that I live and work in, realized that I really sort of gravitated towards the construction side of that and the construction administration side of that, particularly in the way that you can provide engineering support during the construction phase. I think my wife would tell you from my failed home improvement projects that I'm probably not the guy that you want actually doing the construction, but I think that there's a certain skill involved in translating between engineering and engineering documents to a properly executed design, construction in the field. And so really tapped into that, realized that was really the sort of the aspect of the industry that I felt like I thrived in, and I've really enjoyed the change so far.
Great. So when you got into school originally, did you know exactly that you wanted to do civil engineering? You said a liberal arts school, so I imagine perhaps that wasn't your first choice going into school? It
was not necessarily. I was kind of a little bit lost, I'm interested in a vast array of things and wasn't entirely sure. I think if you looked at my high school yearbook, it might say that I was interested in going into business. But I've always kind of been a math and science guy. And I've always enjoyed that. And so kind of gravitated towards, certain classes, throughout undergrad and kind of found my way into the engineering program. I think one of the most formative, two most formative experiences there for me were the opportunity to conduct some undergraduate research on non-destructive testing for structural applications. That was with just a professor that I ended up liking a whole lot, and he was a structural engineer and kind of steered me in that direction. And so I got to do some really fun and exciting research as an undergrad. And then probably the most formative experience for me was 3 years of participation with the student chapter there of Engineers Without Borders, and ended up doing multiple years of design on a gravity-fed water system and filtration system for a tiny little community in Kuf, Cameroon, in West Africa, and got to make the trip at one point and help install some of this stuff. And I think it was there that it kind of got hammered home how engineering could have a real impact on people's lives. And I just liked the harmony of math and science and actual real world execution and implementation. And so one thing led to another, and I kind of kept chasing the structural engineering thing and ended up at the University of Texas and followed that into the industry, and it's been good.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that's a common story, I think, for folks who get involved with Engineers Without Borders or any other organization, that level of impact that, our ability to leverage our design experience overseas and abroad, it hits it home pretty quickly to see that drastic jump of quality of life. Whereas here, if you build another road or build a water line, nobody notices it. They, go along their business and order their next Uber and go to their, next happy hour. But over there, it's a matter of water, clean water, and, an actual pathway to take their crops back and forth if they're an agricultural society. So that's awesome. I think a lot of folks would benefit greatly from participating in that in college and beyond too. Do you participate in organizations in town nowadays?
I helped out a little bit with some of UT's Engineers Without Borders efforts while I was in school. I've since transitioned to a little bit more professional organization stuff. ULI. I still am an active member of the Structural Engineers Association of Texas, maintaining some of that. And so I do think there's still a real need for professional mentors on the Engineers Without Borders side and looking at ways. I think there's a host of good organizations that find ways to, in addition to building more roads for more Ubers to more happy hours, there are a lot of ways to plug into our community, both domestically and globally. And so I think that that's one of the exciting things of being an engineer is continuing to find those opportunities and continuing to tap into those talents. And I think it's something we do pretty well as a firm as well.
Definitely. I think, when it comes down to the level of involvement, it's just like an order of magnitude greater, the level of fulfillment you get out of what you do when you realize how impactful it really can be on the ground.
Absolutely.
Now, when it comes to construction, we interact with contractors and subconsultants a lot in this industry. And when we're finishing out a design, we're getting into construction phase. There's a lot of conversations that goes back and forth between the contractors. And obviously, there's some changes that go along with that too. I mean, perhaps we didn't catch something, or maybe we didn't anticipate something. What are some of the main top 3 gotchas that you usually see on a project when you're working with a design team? What are the top things that you say wish you guys could have saw this earlier? Like, is this a constant thing that probably pops up when us engineers and design teams just kind of assume certain situations?
Yeah, I think the first thing to note is that I don't think there's ever been a mistake in any of Big Red Dog's plans. I think it's always that's a joke. No, I mean, I think that even the best plans are going to run into issues that perhaps a very trained eye catches, and maybe that trained eye catches it 2 times out of 5. It's I think the single biggest item that we run into that requires sort of in construction coordination is differences between surveyed conditions and actual conditions in the field. And so it's particularly a challenge with subsurface stuff like utilities. The best as-built in the city still may not accurately reflect the horizontal or vertical alignments of where this underground stuff is. And then there's other things like fiber optic duct banks or telecommunication duct banks that may not appear on anyone's survey for whatever reason. And so that's probably the biggest thing I've learned in my role is to be as nimble as possible when it comes to these things and not be surprised when surprises arise. So I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges. And that's something that probably is never going away. I think that we do the best we can. We work with a lot of great contractors who are really proactive and really good about going out and trying to, pothole a street or field verify where they can, what the conditions are, and getting with us as early as possible in the process to make any changes we might need to make to our plans. But I think that's just always going to be the reality of working in old infrastructure and trying to update old infrastructure. I think one of the challenges we run into on our plans sometimes, this is something you see across the industry, whether it's civil engineering, structural engineering, mechanical engineering, is figuring things out from a spatial perspective. I think that sometimes you draw things on paper and you don't really realize just how big things are or how tight the constraints of the site might be. I think of water meter vaults for one. Yeah. A 13-foot by 10-foot vault is a very large piece of concrete that looks one way on plan, and even when we draw it to scale, it looks like it should fit in there, and it's an entirely different thing to actually lift it in place and get out there with the contractor and kind of help make sure that things are in place. So that's something we always try to pay attention to on the constructability side, is just what are the big components here, what are the tight spaces on the site, how's this actually going to work, and how does even slight differences between the field conditions and the planned conditions, those can have big time effects on making things fit spatially. Same thing on a structural perspective. It's easy to draw a bunch of rebar in a column. It's another thing to actually place that rebar in there, particularly if you have splices where the bars are overlapping each other, and then the contractor still has to put concrete in there somehow and get it vibrated into place. Right. And so some of those things are just those are good to keep in mind, and they're even better to give our young engineers an opportunity to come out and look at them in the field and learn from that stuff. And ultimately, it makes all of our designs better.
Joel, you touched on something earlier about being nimble, and I think that's really where, having been in your role before, I think that's really where we can add value to a project. Is it's not only knowing the technical side of things, but it's knowing who to talk to at the city or the different jurisdictions, and also knowing how to sort of translate the technical stuff to the contractors in the field. So I think our construction team here in Austin and throughout the state and throughout the country, I think that's really where our construction services team can add value to a project. You have some of these large national firms that are great technically, but they don't necessarily know the exact person to contact for inspections and stuff. And, time is money. If you can't if you don't know the right person to call and talk to and set up a meeting, then you're really delaying the project. So I think that's one thing that really adds value to the project.
Yeah, Kelly, I completely agree. I think I've never once in my role at Big Red Dog felt like the answer or the way to find information was to submit a blank service request to someone at the city or even in the company. In most cases, you can ask one of our many great engineers here, who should I talk to about this? And chances are good they'll not just be able to tell you who to talk to and what their name is. They can tell you the names of their kids and they have their cell phone number programmed in. And I think that's where Big Red Dog really has excelled, is building these relationships and being able to tap into carefully manicured and dedicated relationships with folks around the city in different industries. And in different departments to really be able to provide a high level of service. And I think what you've touched on there extrapolates through the permitting straight out into construction and into successful projects.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all those things, considered, I mean, it gets pretty tough out there, trying to imagine or predict what's underground, with those kind of conflicts when the existing conditions don't match. And the fact that, when you draw something in CAD or putting on a plan, so it doesn't necessarily reflect, the real world size, when you have concrete thickness or deflection and just, even just, inch differentials across a grade where the survey may have called it out of a different height. It's just, there's so many different things that come into play, and having somebody that can bridge the gap between the design and the implementation and execution of it is really, really great opportunity and really great asset to have on the team, just so we know, we're getting it built right, we're getting it designed right. And if there's any lessons learned at the end of the day, you just feed them back into the design team, and it just creates another virtuous cycle for us to constantly, continuously iterate our design process. And I know at some point we're going to have, this level of service across all the markets, and, we already have QAQC elements in place, but, as far as construction phase goes, it's definitely a worthwhile investment for almost any firm to have on their books, just to make sure that everything's working and panning out right. At the very least, having those solid relationships with the contractors, making sure that we have consistent design practices.
Yeah. And it's a good thing you mentioned that too, Sean. I think it's important. We talk a lot about our relationships with clients and with city staff, but we really work with a tremendous number of really great contractors too. And it is a really great thing to have relationships to the point where if you're not sure during design on how something might work, or if it even is a workable solution, to have the cell phone number of a contractor who we've worked on a lot of projects with and we have a really good relationship with, and they're more than happy to take that 10 minutes to talk you through, what might work best. And I think that I've been really fortunate to build some of those relationships here and really make some, not just good relationships professionally, but even, make some personal friends, with some really great folks working in a lot of different aspects of the construction industry.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough business. I have a great deal of respect for contractors. I mean, especially in the state of Texas, the liability of a lot of work is on the shoulders of the contractors. And, as engineers and design professionals, we enjoy a little bit less liability perhaps than in terms of the liability load is concerned for a project. But not that I think we should get more, but, nonetheless, the contractors are definitely burdened with a great deal of liability and responsibility when it comes to delivering a project. So I definitely have a great deal of respect for those folks who are out there, putting our design into place and making sure everything works. Kind of switching gears a bit, I guess wanted to touch base with, more or less what are your interests in outside of work? Are you kind of a stay in the city kind of person? You go out to the hill country a little bit. What's your idea of a good weekend?
Maybe it's the liberal arts background, but I have interests in a whole bunch of things. I do. The answer to your question is yes. I'm a dad to an almost 2-year-old, so that's kind of changed things in the last couple of years here. But we still get a chance to get out and do all kinds of fun stuff. A lot of what I do now is just chase him around and try to keep him alive. But
you're doing a good job.
It's been great. But on the city side of things, it's Austin. I love getting out and seeing a good show. Music's a big thing. Food's a big thing. And I kind of scratched the artistic itch a little bit with photography. I like photography, dabble in that a little bit. And so particularly architectural photography, I think interests me just in the sense of I understand buildings. And buildings don't run or fly away when you're trying to take a picture of them. So it's not easier than any other kind of photography, but it at least gives you time to kind of put the engineer's mindset to really thinking through your photograph and lining it up. So I like doing that. I think if you ask my wife, she would tell you my quirkiest thing is I'm an avid bird watcher. And so that gets me out. That's a family tradition. I've been doing that with my dad and my grandpa for as long as I can remember. I'm an avid lister of the species that I've seen, both in the U.S. and in other countries. And so I love getting out and doing that. I combine that with my travel interests and my photography interests as well. So that's maybe the more unique. You don't see a whole lot of construction phase managers or bird guys out there. It puts me in a class with different kinds of folks, but it's good. It's a way to connect with people and get outside, and it's a quirky thing, but it's something I really enjoy.
Is Texas good for bird watching?
Texas is. Austin is actually, Austin is not particularly, as it wouldn't be classified particularly as a hot spot for bird watching, but there's
watch a lot of grapples.
It's true. There are plenty of things that make their way through here. And obviously this is kind of the heart of the golden cheeked warbler territory that we've all grappled with a little bit on the development side. Right. So, but Texas is very much a very good, birding state. And so I try to combine some weekend trips with, seeing the sights of this great state and also trying to see some of its birds. So yeah, that's one of the things. I'm an avid sports fan, really love sports. I mentioned I'm from Michigan. I didn't attend the University of Michigan, but I have several family members who are alums, and I'm a pretty rabid fan, and I do my best to balance out the Ohio State influence that we seem to have too much of here in the office. So I do enjoy sports a lot. And I like playing sports. I love playing some pickup sports when I can. I try to golf as often as I can. So I stay busy. It's good. It's a good thing to stay busy at work and then to have not enough time every weekend to try to cram in your hobbies either. So
yeah, definitely. Well, I could definitely relate. Having that toddler in the household changes everything. It gets you out and running and farther than you expect to. Just chasing after the little ones is an exercise into itself. Or that's a full-time job. So it's amazing you get a good chance to get all that stuff done at the same time too. It's not really. I've not had an opportunity to do any bird watching myself. Maybe I'll have to take a peek around the Houston area. I know there's some spots around here. So I kind of wanted to get to the end here with a new segment that I just thought about not too long ago between episodes. I haven't even talked to Kelly about this one, so I'm going to foist it upon him randomly. It's kind of a hot seat-esque segment that just to throw surprises. It out there.
I like them.
We'll fly by the seat of our pants here. Keeping it fresh here on Unleashed. That's the name of the game. We're constantly iterating, constantly thinking of new marketing techniques. Now, basically, we want to get to know you a little bit better, and we want to find a couple more creative outlets to provide value to our listeners too. So there's 3 questions, general questions about your personality and making sure we end this podcast on a consistent note. So basically, we'll just roll into these questions. So question number one, if we may actually have a bookshelf on the office there in the Austin office, but if there was just a corporate global bookshelf for Big Red Dog, what one book would you add to it and recommend for everybody else to read?
Oh man, does the Sibley Guide to North American Birds count? Like, I feel like everyone should have one of those.
Oh, sure, I'm into it. Do it. Let's go into that one.
No, I think that's a great question. I'm an avid reader, love to read, always have. Don't get to read nearly as much as I'd like to anymore. I think most of my reading at this point comes from the literary greats like Dr. Seuss. But having a little guy in the house. But no, that's great. This is a book that I read a couple of years ago, but it's kind of had a lasting impact on me. There's a book called Just Mercy by a guy named Brian Stevenson, who's done a lot of work with death row inmates. And it's kind of a poignant and relatively searing look at some of the biases that go into death row convictions or capital convictions, and just an interesting look at some of the ways that our political system works. So I realize that may be a little bit of a hot button issue, but I thought not steering away from some of those issues and tackling them, is a good thing. And I thought it was a really good book that I enjoyed. The book I'm currently finishing right now, and I realize I'm not singling this down to one, but I'm reading a book, not surprisingly, called Birding Without Borders. And it's the story of a young guy, I think he was 28, 29, who a couple of years ago set out on a round-the-world trip to see as many species of birds in a single year as he could. And his goal was 5,000 species, which was well above the established record. And spoiler alert, he ends up with well over 6,000. And it's just the book is less about the birds and more about the experiences. And, it's one of those books that you read and you kind of get lost in, and it kind of makes you think about all the cool things that cool people are doing out there. And I've really enjoyed it. So. Nice. Yeah, those are really unique suggestions. I was hoping you would go with a unique option instead of suggesting something that was generic, like how to win friends and influence people, or something that every business professional has already read or something. So that's awesome. That would great first additions to the virtual bookshelf that we have here that we're starting with this episode. Second question, I guess, if you have. If perhaps you weren't an engineer and Big Red Dog didn't exist, what occupation or line of work would you think you would be involved with to basically support yourself and your family? Oh man, you had to throw the support yourself thing in there. I thought this was like just
if money was no issue.
If money was no issue, I think I'd fulfill the childhood dream of just being a park ranger or a wildlife guide or something. My wife and I were in South Africa a few years ago on vacation, and I came really close to applying for a safari guide position. I don't know how well that would have worked, but it sure sounded fun. That's a great question. I think that in a lot of ways, being an engineer is very analytical, and I think that many of us that do it are really good at being analytical. So I think if I had to do something different, I would try to challenge myself on more of the artistic side. And so something that, maybe this is the liberal arts background talking as well, but I actually really enjoy writing. And I would actually love to write. If I had more time to do it, I would love to, whether it be journalism or actually author a book. And I think that's still on the quote unquote bucket list at some point for me. So I'd really love to do that at some point. Awesome. No, you're pretty much a Renaissance man with photography, bird watching, writing. I mean, you could do it all. I mean, we have some Renaissance men in the office. I don't want to put myself in their category, but sure. So, also, like park ranger or safari guide, you're kind of like a docent for the forest or something. I have a cousin who does that sort of stuff, and he has a blast doing it. Sounds like a lot of fun. Last question, and I guess this one kind of ties back into the mission of the company. What does it mean to you to make the engineering business cool? Oh, that's a great question. I don't think you can answer that question without reflecting on Big Red Dog's mission statement, and stated goal of making the engineering business cool. One of the things that attracted me to Big Red Dog after, practicing for a while and kind of getting the lay of the land, as you will, with engineering, there are a lot of engineers that do things the same way. I mean, at the end of the day, all of us as engineers kind of do the same. We have the same goals, right? In terms of the real measurable stuff, right? The building can't fall over. The air conditioning has to work. The wastewater's got to flow downhill, all that kind of stuff. And so we all do the same work. I like to think that we do it better here than anyone else, but I think the truth of it is that, we're all at least semi-competent at doing all that stuff, right? But I think where Big Red Dog really stands apart is the people that they hire to do that and the way that they go about doing it. There's a real challenge here to look at things from a fresh perspective and not just, there's only so many ways you can interpret engineering code, but there are a lot more ways and a lot more latitude in how you can interpret relationships with clients, relationships with each other, relationships with co-consultants. And I think we've stood out as really hiring cool people and cool people with big personalities. And I think that really breeds a culture of making the engineering business cool, in the sense that the perks are great here, but also the people are really what makes this place stand out, and the ability to have a lot of fun while still doing kind of the same amount of work and the same kind of work as a lot of other engineers have done for decades. And so for me, that's kind of what I love about this place, is that there's a lot of people and a lot of personality, and you almost forget sometimes about the work that you're doing. And that's not because you're not paying attention to the work, but just that there's so much cool factor involved with the folks that you're doing it with. Is that a semi-good answer for you?
That's an awesome answer, man. That's a good one to start the question off with. So I'm excited to hear everybody else's answer, but I think you set the bar pretty easily. So
that's good. You're hired, Joel. Good job.
Oh,
good job.
Good.
Yeah, you're actually going to, now that you've already done the construction side, you're going to be jumping over to the marketing team here shortly after.
Remember,
so.
Everyone's on the marketing team here.
That's right. That's correct. Well, that does it for another episode of Unleashed. As always, you can find our show notes online at bigreddog.com/podcast. You can also find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play Store, or wherever you download your podcasts. And if you could leave us a review or rating as well in whatever storefront you find us, that would be really appreciated.
And thanks to everyone who's been sharing the podcast with their coworkers and their family and friends. We've seen a tremendous response, especially to our little Instagram contest from the last episode. Overwhelming response. We're out of t-shirts, so stop DMing me, please. But thank you for everyone who reached out, and we're out of shirts from that episode. If you guys listen to the Siri episode after you listen to this one, just know that we're out of those. But stay tuned for future contests, social media contests.
Yeah, and no Big Red Dog employee received a t-shirt as a result of that. And I know I definitely didn't, at least. Well, until next time, folks, take care for now.